Welcome to Integrity and Joy. I'm Steve Walker. Today, my conversation with Jamie Arkin, a New Yorker and former student of mine turned public health and development consultant who's based in Cape Town, South Africa. So welcome to episode 3 of Integrity and Joy. I am Steve Walker, former U.S. diplomat, activist, and educator, and now I'm a life coach, meditation teacher, and podcast host. So thanks for joining me. It's the holiday season as we're getting ready to launch this episode. And, it can be a challenging time, right? For me, there are things I adore about the holiday season, and there are things that stress me out and even bum me out. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And so, just a reminder to show ourselves and each other a little more grace, a little more compassion, patience, forgiveness, and to really lean into the spirit of the season, which is really about gratitude and love and peace and renewal. So I hope we can all try to do that because, it's tough to expect that you're going to be like joyful and happy and grateful every day throughout the holiday season. So let's be empathetic and understanding and compassionate with ourselves and each other. Anyways, and one of the things that's great about the season is that New Year's is coming, and New Year's is a great moment to pause and reflect on the year that is coming to a close and to set some intentions for the new year. And it's almost a cliche that New Year's resolutions, largely fall by the wayside by February 1st. I'd love to help you change that equation and set some intentions that will lead to some lasting change in your life. So I hope you'll go to my website, www.integrityandjoy.com, and either sign up for one of the workshops that I'm going to be offering, including a free one on reflecting on 2024, and also look into setting up a free consultation to talk about whether one-to-one coaching would be a good fit for you. So please, again, go to www.integrityandjoy.com and do something that could actually lead to meaningful change in your life in 2025. I'd love to help you. Today's episode, I'm really excited. This is the first one that is a conversation between me and somebody who I think is having an interesting life. And a lot of these people the first season are going to be former students of mine because I've had the blessing of having taught during my 25 years as a teacher some really interesting, good people. And I think there are a lot of great life lessons. And I also think that it's going to be reassuring to most of us that, even the people who have a plan in the beginning, everybody's kind of figuring it out as they go along. And Jamie Arkin, my guest today, she's a great example of that. You'll hear that in some ways she had a plan in the beginning, but she's been making it up as she's been going along. She's been flexible and adaptable and has learned a lot. There's some wonderful life lessons embedded and sprinkled throughout this conversation. I think you're going to find her story interesting. I think you're going to find her to be intelligent and reflective and authentic. And her story, I think, is really interesting. She'll be talking about her life working for the most part over the last 10 years in Africa on public health and international development. If you're not familiar with that world, you'll learn a little bit about how that all works. And I think it's going to be interesting for everybody, but in particular, if you know people in their teens, 20s, even 30s who are trying to figure life out, trying to figure out their path, I think this is a great episode to share with them. I think they will in particular find it inspirational and really helpful with the lessons that Jamie shares throughout this conversation. So without any further ado, here's my conversation that was recorded in August with Jamie Arkin. Jamie Arkin, welcome to Integrity and Joy, the podcast. I'm really excited to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. This is just such a fun opportunity. So thank you.
Yeah, it's great. So for listeners, Jamie and I know each other because I taught Jamie a while back. What years were you at Horace Greeley High School?
Yeah, so I've known you since 2004 when
Wow.
I made my way into a class that I wasn't allowed to be in. Oh, no, no. First, it started when I was in student government, when I was a freshman, and when I was a sophomore. I weaseled my way into a juniors and seniors only political science class that literally they forgot to print in the manual of classes, which back then was paper-based. They forgot to print for juniors and seniors only. So I was able to manipulate the guidance counselor to let me into your course. So yeah, I was there from 2004 to 2008. So it's been a long
Wow.
time, 20 years.
Wow. That is a long time. Amazing.
Yeah,
And especially when you
yeah,
think about like all that's happened in the world since 2004, it feels like 40 years or something.
yeah, yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. Where are you physically today?
Yeah, so today I am calling in from Cape Town, South Africa, where it's actually beautiful and sunny, but winter. So I'm in my long sleeves, even though it's August.
Wow. Yeah, I had the pleasure of being in Cape Town a few years back. It is a unique and spectacular place.
Yeah, someone described it once to me as if you got to design your own city, it would look like Cape Town. It's the mountain and the ocean, and it's just so stunningly beautiful. I feel really lucky to get to live here.
Yeah, amazing. How long have you been there?
So I moved here in January, but I'll say I moved here from Kenya, where I was living in Nairobi for 4 years. And before Nairobi, I was living in Kampala, Uganda for 3.5 years. So I left the US almost 10 years ago now, and have
Wow.
been based in Africa ever since.
So obviously, just from that, your path is pretty unique compared to most people who grow up in the United States, and I would say most people who go to a high school like Horace Greeley, right? Suburban, kind of affluent. Um, well, how would you describe your childhood, like when you think back on it?
Yeah, so look, I was just a typical kid from Westchester, right? Like there was nothing that stood out that was different. I didn't, vacation in Africa as a kid, but um, and I was just didn't know, have a passion for anything until my cousin, who is 10 years older than me, he sent home a video from the Peace Corps. So on a VHS, he and I had never actually even met. So I was 11 and he was 21, and he sent this video that somehow my mom got, and somehow I watched it. And I just thought that is so cool that he's making a difference. And I want to do that one day too. And so, I wasn't musical. I did like dance and art, but I wasn't talented at anything. So I wasn't passionate about some path or anything. So for me, this is what clicked in my life. But um, yeah, I'd never even been to Africa before, and I decided this was my path forward. So it was quite a unique thing. I think fell into it. The other thing that happened though is my mom used to tell me stories about how she graduated high school early and moved to Italy when she had and then went to college, graduated early, and moved to Italy at 21 years old also. And so in my mind, everything lined up to when you're older, you get to just go seize the world and do what you want. And so that's just the path I was I think bound for.
Wow. That's so powerful, right? You think about it because I think for most people, we have our own little bubble that we grow up in. And I think Chappaqua, which is 45 minutes north of New York City, I think to a lot of the kids growing up there feels like a bubble, right? And yet you had a couple of really powerful role models that basically said to you at a really important time in your life, no, there's this whole world out there. And once you leave here, you get to go explore it, right? That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, it's one of those things that you don't realize is necessarily even happening with young people. But yeah, it's those subliminal messages, and you don't know what people are going to pick up on. And it's interesting when I went to my 10-year high school reunion to see the number of students from my class that live in New York City, right? That was their dream, was to just get out of Chappaqua and get to the city, which is amazing for them. I also was a little bit fortunate that my father lived in the city from when I was 11 years old. So that was my life every other weekend. So it wasn't as aspirational as it can
Mm.
be for most people. I mean, there was this funny part where when my friends who lived in New York were moving to Brooklyn, I was like, you can't move to Brooklyn. Meanwhile, I was living in Kampala, Uganda. I was judging people from Africa. Like it's more acceptable for me to live in Uganda than you to live in Brooklyn. Like
That's
I have a
hysterical.
little bit of a warped view. Yeah.
Well, it's true. I mean, it's true. We get these like I don't know, expectations or biases or paradigms, right, that get forged at an early age. And they can be really bizarre and rigid sometimes, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, and the whole New York thing, I think that's an interesting thing too, right? Um, it struck me at least that a lot of people growing up in Chappaqua, because New York City is such an iconic city, maybe the iconic city in some ways, right? Um, I think there's this feeling of like, well, where am I going to find anything better, right? And
Yeah.
which, on certain levels, you can go like, sure, there are certain things that like, wow, it may be the best place in the world to find certain things, but it feels like just another version of what sometimes can feel like American, you know, myopia, right? That there's this, you know, um, belief that everything that you ever want is here, the best of everything you would want is here, without having explored or understanding that it's not necessarily a competition, but there are different experiences out there. But like New York feels like this magnet that like, oh my God, it's the mecca of cities, right? Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think for me, I wanted to get away from all of that. I just had this vision where I was going to be different. I was going to learn more and I was going to see more than
Mm,
anything that I'd already done and seen. And so I think that sense of immature ego actually is what propelled me
wow.
outside of it in some way. And I went to school at Tulane. I went to New Orleans. New Orleans is so different from New York in so many ways. I went right after Hurricane Katrina. And a big part of
Wow.
that was how do I be part of the city rebuilding? Which then would feed
Wow.
into my career in Africa. In my brain, I'd
Wow.
already planned this whole thing out.
Okay, so say more about that. Say more about like the decision to go to Tulane and what that was like at that time. Like
Yeah,
why
so
Tulane?
so one thing was I heard it was the biggest feeder school to the Peace Corps, and I wanted to join the
Wow.
Peace Corps. And my cousin who sent this video home was in the Peace Corps and he'd gone to Tulane. So I was going to do the same thing. Like I was really on this path. And it's really funny how young people can build a path that they are just insistent on following. And like, thank God mine was like an educational do good path and not like, I'm going to be some sort of like pop star path because I can't sing or dance very well. But like I'd chosen this whole thing. And then one thing that was interesting is post Katrina Tulane said that community service was a requirement to graduate. And I liked that. I was interested in that and seeing how I could contribute to this community service aspect in order and then thinking that that was going to make like-minded students as well. Now, I'm not going to say like it was all perfect. I liked the fact that it was a party town. I liked the fact that I could get into bars at 18 because I was from New York and I knew freedom. So there was this mix of things, but that was
Right.
really what propelled me to choose Tulane.
Wow. What else was it like going to school there? I mean, the post Katrina world. Like, what was it like when you got there, and then how do you think it affected your 4 years there?
Yeah, actually, I stayed for six.
That's
I went
right,
to grad school
for a
there
master's,
too.
right? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I ended up pursuing a master's in public health after my undergrad, where I focused on political science. But look, when I got there, the first time I went to visit, I thought I was being kidnapped by a cab driver because I was in like some neighborhood where all the houses were boarded up, and then the next block I was pulling onto campus, and I was
Wow.
like, oh my God, what is this place like? And let me tell you, like, there were so many wonderful things about it. It was so much fun and we had a great time, but it was also scary. There was a lot of very violent crime happening. Um, there was a lot of learning to be done. So I ended up starting a group called Women and Youth Supporting Each Other, which is a collegiate program for young college women to mentor middle school girls. And it was in a few other colleges in the US. I met a woman who ran the USC chapter and she helped me bring it to Tulane. So I was in middle schools there, really understanding how these young people are struggling in the city and how their parents are struggling. And I'd never really seen people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. I'd never really engaged with people who come from different walks of life. And I always had empathy, but now it was this interaction. So that was a really interesting component. the music in the city was amazing too. Like, this is what I'm saying, is there's such a big duality of the joy and also the challenges of being in a city that was already having some of the worst crime in the country, compounded by such a tragic and traumatic natural disaster.
Yeah. Wow. Um, was there a part of you ever that had second thoughts about your choice of colleges while you were there?
No, never. I mean, look, the first week we got evacuated. And so you think, oh God, are we doing Katrina 2.0? I didn't apply to any other colleges, so I don't have a backup that's going to take me for a
Wow.
semester. So I immediately, like, we were there for 1 week, and a girl I met the first week of college, she and I jumped in a car with some other girls I can't even remember and drove to Atlanta. We stayed in Atlanta for 2 days, and then we realized we weren't going back to school that week. And so I flew home and was home for a week and then back to college again. But yeah, that was as much as I ever thought about going anywhere else. And then no, I was in it.
Wow. That's
Yeah, yeah,
incredible. Oh my God. A
yeah.
lot of people would have been heading for the exits, right?
Yeah, I think
Wow.
everyone came back. You just realize, oh, this is part of the game. Is I had one other year, my first year, my master's program, where you had a not a mandatory but an optional recommended evacuation the first week of school. I stayed. Big mistake. It was just really hot and stuffy for 4 days. That
Uh,
was it. That was and no power. So that was the mistake. I was completely safe and fine. It was just really boring and really sweaty.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So, okay, so obviously, like, pretty intense experience at times, right, in college. And it sounds like impactful in some really powerful ways. How do you, when you think about the person you were when you showed up in New Orleans, and then the person who left 6 years later, what had changed? And what impact, how much of that was the school? How much of it was the city? How much of it was something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I showed up. I was an intense kid, as you could hear. Like, I had a plan, and I was like really rigid, my way or the highway. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, Steve, but I graduated a semester early,
Right.
and I said some unkind things to adults to make that happen. I
Wow.
played systems. Was really, I was kind of, yeah, it was kind of like a CEO in kid pants. Like, it was just an odd thing, but yeah, it was intense. And so I got to New Orleans, and everything is slower and everybody is kind. And I remember my mom and I went to the Rite Aid, and every lady in the Rite Aid was so nice to us. And we just thought, this place is the best. And so then I wanted to be like them. So I started waving at strangers and slowing down my car just to say hi to somebody on the street. And
Wow.
really kind of changing my perspective about how I approached interpersonal relationships to try to slow it down and think of other people. And also, I built a group of friends, and none of my friends were from New York City. You know, they were from all over the US. And so they also came from really different paces and expectations and walks of life. And they were studying different things than me. And so rather than falling into a group of all people from the Northeast, I mean, my friends were from Texas and Chicago and Buffalo, which doesn't count as New York for some reason in my mind, because that's not the same. But, you know, they were from different places. And so that also encouraged me to change, right? And I think one of my college roommates said to me one day, she said, James, you have such high expectations of everybody. You know, why? Does it have to be that way? Because then you find yourself disappointed. And I thought, yeah, why do I have to approach everybody like this? So I think that part of what the school brought me and the city brought me was someone who was a lot softer, a lot more flexible and malleable.
Wow.
Um, and by the time I left, yeah, 6 years later, it was definitely a very different person than who showed up.
Wow. It's incredibly insightful, by the way, your ability to reflect on that and see that. And it's also interesting. It makes me think, oftentimes there's a stereotype, right? That, like, the person who has the personality that you had, let's say in high school, right? Where you're like singular focused, driven, maybe a little like, working the system, manipulating the system, like being really kind of hard edge, whatever. We have a stereotype that that's the person who like goes into finance, right? They're going to work on Wall
Yeah.
Street, or they're going to be a lawyer. Like, how many kids with that kind of, affect and mindset is told from the time they're 7, you should be a lawyer, And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yet here you are, but it's being focused towards like a mindset of exploration, altruism, right? Making a difference. Like the whole Peace Corps thing, is that the frame that really could you have gone the finance route, or like were you almost destined to be open to somebody coming along with the Peace Corps kind of mindset and saying, hey, there's a path that's really meaningful?
That's a good question. I couldn't have gone into finance because I'm not great with numbers. I also like I think I always needed passion to be attached to something, and I
Mm,
don't think I was ever going to be driven by um I think I was driven by being out of the box, being untraditional, being something
mm,
different from what everybody else was. That's the way I fought my upbringing, as we all fight our upbringing in some way. Mine was to not go into advertising, be an attorney, or go into property or finance, right? It was to do something else. But also, I didn't channel that kind of mindset into getting into Harvard either. I just channeled it into
right.
getting out, doing something different, and really breaking a mold. And so that was, I think, more of an explosion in all directions than one
Wow.
direction.
Can you pinpoint why you had that mindset, or was it something that felt innate?
I think it was something that felt innate. I actually found my diary from high school, and it's torture to read. It's amazing.
Oh, wow.
I went abroad when I was 16 to Spain, and literally every entry after it was like, I'm just better than this town. I can't believe how small it
Oh.
is. I'm so cultured. I'm so amazing. Right? I'm like,
Oh my gosh. Oh my
gross. It's
gosh.
so funny. I read it. I read it at parties. It's just so torturous. It's so funny.
Oh.
But yeah, I
Oh.
think I loved to travel and go out and meet new people. And actually something that I think is really interesting was also in meeting new people when I was in Spain. They were from all different countries again, right? It wasn't like a group of Americans in Spain. It was three Americans out of 40 of us. And so
Wow.
one thing I really learned was to interact with people of different backgrounds. And then coming back, you're just like, well, how do I make that happen the most? And so everything was then around this, right? And who knows how actually enlightened or cultured I got in Spain. It was just like I did something different than all these kids. And this is what makes me stand out now. And therefore, I'm going to continue to pursue that.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. So you're okay. So that now you're in college, you choose political science. Is that a no-brainer? Like, was there ever any doubt there?
Never. There was this guy who was my teacher in high school who had been in the Foreign Service, and I took all
Hmm.
social studies courses and really was interested in it. And so, yeah, that's what I did. Yeah, no, that
Sounds
was it.
familiar.
Steve, you
Sounds
really
familiar.
influenced me for that path.
Well, thank you. That's quite an honor. I hope it seems to have worked out. So
Yeah,
otherwise you could have been like, why'd you lead me down that path?
no,
Um,
it was great.
so so what made you decide to stay for another 2 years and do a master's right away? There's a lot of people who, after having been in school for 13 years up until college, and then they go to college for another four, they're like, get me out of here. Or they don't know yet really what they want to focus on, and they got to go out and explore and whatever. What made you? I mean, it's not a shock, I guess, to the listeners at this point that, oh, Jamie had a plan. Like, and
Yeah, yeah,
she's,
yeah. Weird.
she's charging right ahead, not wasting any time. What made you
Yeah,
do
well,
that?
actually, I was originally going to join the Peace Corps right out of college. I'd finished my application. I was sitting at University of Botswana where I'd studied abroad. And I was like, I'm not going to the Peace Corps. I don't want to. I'm here in Botswana. I'm doing interesting work. I live in a dormitory at the university. I don't want to live in a mud hut for 2 years. It's not for me. If I'm going to work in Africa, I'll find my way here. But that Peace Corps route that was my original path wasn't going to happen.
Wow.
I didn't want it anymore. I was like, look, it's hard enough living in this dorm and doing my 1 week homestay. For me, yeah, not the option. I still want to live there and work there, but so then I pivoted. My initial plan was to do the Peace Corps for 2 years and then go back and get my master's degree Tulane at the time, I think this was their strategy for bringing students back and bringing students in longer to generate revenue that had obviously been lost and through the hurricane. But they made all these 4+1 programs. So get a master's in finance in 5 years, get a master's in architecture in 5 years, master's in public health 5 years. So all of my roommates stayed. Like if I didn't stay,
Wow.
I would have been the only one to leave. And so
Wow.
naturally it also just fit to be like, oh, well, they're all going to be there. And I stayed living with the same three other women for an additional year, and then one of them for another year too. So yeah, it's not that sexy of a reason, but it was clever on Tulane's part.
Everybody else is doing it, man. Boy, that's the one time
Yeah,
where you decided not to be the like divergent person who's gonna
yeah, it's
buck the
true.
trend,
It's
right?
true.
Well,
Yep,
how about
yep.
now Botswana? So why Botswana? It feels like most Americans are like, I want to go to Florence and drink for a semester. Why Botswana?
Yes, because I'm a nerd. And I was like, this is part of my plan. And so I did my research, and Botswana had the highest rate of HIV and the most stable democracy in Africa. And I thought that's really fascinating to pursue my two passions of political science and public health and understand, how those two things happen at the same time in this country.
Mm,
And so I learned a lot about, why those things are happening, both due to the fact that actually Botswana is the size of, I think, Texas, but it only has 2 million people in the whole country.
mm,
So, and they're all the same, or majority are the same ethnic group. So, like, that's why democracy works, but then why HIV?
wow,
And so there's a combination of um, infrastructure, like long haul trucking, that contributes, but then also just sociology and the way people behave. And so, yeah, it was really
wow,
interesting.
wow.
Yeah.
Did why public health? How had that become a
Mm.
passion of yours at that point?
Yeah. So, in studying political science and getting into international development a bit, I learned that basically the only section of political science and international development that you can show tangible outcomes is public health. There's no like,
Wow.
oh, the UN is making democracy in this country happen XYZ ways. There's no evidence. You talk to somebody who's been at the UN in Israel for 10 years and they're struggling every day, right? And so then
Right.
you also look at agriculture. There's still so many issues in the agriculture space, especially in Africa, and education. You still have so many illiterate people, but we don't have polio anymore. We don't have smallpox
Mm,
anymore. We've reduced, maternal mortality by X% in each country. And so you can actually see those changes really quickly happening in your lifetime, or even just, in your college career could have changed. So I
wow.
thought that's really nice to actually see your work succeed.
Wow. Yeah, so it's interesting. It seems to kind of fit though with the way that you look at the world. I mean, you're like data driven, like, intellectual rigor and all that. It's not surprising you'd be drawn to the thing where like, where's the evidence that this is actually going to
Yeah,
work, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Wow. So were there other options other than Botswana?
Oh yeah, I actually had to apply specially to go to Botswana. It wasn't part of my school's program. I'm such a nerd.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, I specifically picked it, and then it was really funny. I picked it for those reasons. I could have gone to Cape Town, or I could have gone to Ghana. Those were already programs that would have been, or maybe it was Durban, not Cape Town, but South Africa or Ghana. And I thought, no, I want to go to Botswana. And I got there, and I was like, I picked it
Wow.
for these reasons. And the other people who were mostly from California were like, yeah, but we get to go on safari. Like it's part of the package. And I was like, we're going on safari? I didn't even look at the details at all. And they're like, yeah, it's included in tuition. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm such a dork.
Wow. So it's interesting. So you go there, it's part of your like Peace Corps plan, the grand
Yeah,
plan that's been in place for
the grand
years.
plan.
And the experience ends up making you go, no, no, not Peace Corps.
Yeah.
How did you
Yeah.
feel about that?
I just thought, look, I want to make an impact and I can do it. I can do it without the structure and the framework of the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps was sexy and cool and structured and these things, but you kind of hear niggles on the other side, like they're not very supportive of you, or like it's actually not that great, or you don't really make an impact, but you kind of push them down when you really believe it. But then when you get there and you look around and you think, okay, well, actually, yeah, they're probably right. And maybe I don't want to take these risks. And maybe I do want to listen to some of the mediocre sayers. I won't say full
Mm,
naysayers, but the people who are questioning if it's worth it,
right.
and and just forge a more traditional path for once of employment to get me there. And I just thought I can do it.
What's interesting, I mean, you say it's like the more traditional, in some ways it is, right? That I'm going to have an employer and I'm going to be an employee and get a salary and all that. I'm going to live in a house or an apartment or whatever, not, right? But, but in some ways, like the Peace Corps was like I don't say narrow-minded, but like narrow view of the world, right? Initially, your
Mhm.
world got expanded more than most people's in high school because it's like, oh, there's this world out there. I should go explore it. And
Yeah.
there's this thing called the Peace Corps, and they do really good work, right? And you can make a difference in the world in other places. Okay, boom. And that's for most people, like that's all they know, right? But once you got out there and you could see a bigger picture, then that path, which in some ways was the easier path to stay on, right? Do the Peace Corps. Like lots of people do the Peace Corps and then they do something
Yeah.
else. They do foreign service or they do development work or they come back to the States and get a job. But in some ways, like you broke off of that path. In some ways, it may feel traditional, but I don't think it's traditional going off
Yeah.
and following the
Probably
career
not.
path that you did, right? Maybe coming back here and getting the master's was, right? And you're following in the footsteps of your peers, like, oh, everybody else is doing this. Did the master's program, did that change you as much or in any way similar to the way college did? I mean, you're in the same place, the same city, but you're
Yeah.
really diving deep. You'd been in Botswana. Like, what was that like coming back and going to grad school?
Yeah. So I tell everybody else, don't go straight to grad school from undergrad. If you're studying public health, at least. I treated grad school like it was undergrad. So
Mm,
I didn't gain much from it. Unfortunately, I didn't really break out of the mold. I thought every activity in class was a project. I didn't realize, like, oh, a monitoring and evaluation framework is actually used every day by every nonprofit you've ever met. Like, I just thought, oh, this is like a boring classroom assignment, like stupid or whatever. I didn't
wow.
grasp anything that I didn't grasp that any of it was real world applicable because in undergrad, so much of it is just an assignment, a project to test your knowledge. So because of that, I felt like when I got out of school, I hadn't really gained as much as I could have. I also maybe would have chosen to go to a different program. Tulane was good, but it wasn't great with the international perspective. Or particularly department I found myself in wasn't great with the international perspective. And I didn't realize till it was a little too late that I should have been in a different department or maybe a different school where they had better resources to connect me to Africa. I ended up
Mm.
yeah, just like falling through the cracks of a school system because I also didn't advocate for myself or didn't care to advocate for myself. I was used to just, yeah, being in school, you do your homework, you get good grades, and you go to the next semester. And so, yeah, I kind of think I lost out on the grad school experience because of those things.
That's really interesting. I get asked a lot by people, should they go straight to grad school for international affairs or international development or something like that? And I almost always say no. First off, it's a lot of money, right? Grad school is a
Mm.
lot of money, and there isn't the kind of financial aid usually that there is for undergrad for people. And so you're either going to be spending or borrowing and paying back a ton of money. And also, I think that a lot of people fall into the same trap that you did. I did. I went to Columbia for a year right out of college. My experience was very similar. I worked my ass off and got good grades and did my work and did my reading. But I was doing it to get it done and to get the good grades, whatever. I was learning, but and learned a lot in some ways. But I was very naive and not as purposeful as I was when I went back several years later as a fellow. And I really felt like it was a completely different experience. I had a wisdom, a perspective, a purpose that I didn't have before. And so I always tell people, like, if you think at some point down the road you need or want the master's for where your career is headed at that point, great. And you'll have more purpose and probably make a better choice also, as you're saying, about which school to go to, right?
Yeah, yeah, and you know how to relate to your professors better. You know, you feel less like a
Yeah,
student, you feel like a peer, somebody who can have thoughtful conversations. I never had a thoughtful conversation with a professor. Like I never
yeah,
asked them for a coffee and then picked their brains. I had one TA from undergrad who I still connect with, but other than that, yeah, you just don't know how to relate as an adult to adults.
yeah. That's a great point. Okay, so you get your master's, then what happens?
And you know, it's scary. You get that dream job, right? That you worked your entire since you were 11 years old for, and you get the dream job, and you're just like, but now what? Right. And I got this dream job. I was working for a nonprofit in San Diego that was helping women access safe abortion and post-abortion care in Kenya and South Africa.
Wow.
Um, it was really amazing. I really believed in what they did. And my boss and I didn't get along,
Oh,
and I was sitting in San Diego with no network of people in the international development field, nobody in the public health field in Africa, because I'm in San Diego, which is beautiful, but I'm so far from the work. Um, I'd actually, right after grad school, first, actually, I should say, I thought, okay, I'll get a job right away. Someone's going to hire me. I have a master's degree. And no one was hiring me. And a professor sent an
wow.
email and she said, who wants to take an unpaid internship in Zambia? And I thought, ew, I'm not taking an unpaid internship in Zambia. I deserve a paying job. And my classmate, one of two people I became friends with in grad school, she said, I'm going on this unpaid internship in Zambia. You should come too. And I sat and I thought, if Olivia goes and I don't, I'm going to be so jealous. Okay, fine, never mind. And I immediately, within 10 seconds, sent the professor an email and said, I don't count me in. And she said, okay,
Wow.
great, you're in it. And so I actually went to Zambia for 3 months with this classmate, Olivia. And she and I loved it so much. The internship was fine, it was average, but we really liked the work in Zambia and believed we could do something. So we started our own company there, and I planned to move there full time with her.
Wow.
She did end up moving there full time, and I think lived there for the next 6 or 8 years. Um, but I had to leave. I had to like go do paperwork in the US. And then I got this dream job right when I got home. So I was like
Wow.
debating between, do I go back to Zambia and try to figure it out on my own with Olivia, or do I take this dream job? And so I took the dream job, of course, which, as I alluded to before, then ended up not being the dream job. And you think, well, what do I do? I'm kind of stranded, no network, no, options. I have no idea how to get out of this.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so that was a really tough situation. And I got lucky then because Olivia then messaged me. I was about 9 months later. She said, well, my company, that not the startup we founded, but she ended up getting a job. And she said, this company I'm working for is hiring. And I think you'd be perfect for the job.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah. And
Not the
so they
direct
said,
line,
okay,
right?
not the direct one. Well, that's the thing that was scary, is like I did all this stuff and now I was here, and I could see at the moment I've worked for the last 15 years to get here, and now I'm here, but what next? And then
Yeah.
when you realize that the thing there isn't the right one. But yeah, then Olivia helped me find this job, and they said, look, we're looking to hire. Do you want to go to Tanzania, Uganda, or Ghana? So it was like all of those things. I got out from San Diego. I got back onto the continent.
Wow.
I was working with one of my closest friends, and so it all started to realign again.
Wow. That's sounding more like the dream job, right? Because you know it's the purpose, right, and the job description. But I mean, they say that the one of, if not the most important factor in job satisfaction is the people, right?
Mm.
So if you've got a conflict with somebody important that you're working with, or the people aren't a great match for you, values wise or vision wise, that's going to be unsustainable, right? Wow.
Oh yeah, yeah. It
All
was
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
It happens, and then you just have to have the wherewithal to make a plan, right, and get out and not sit through it, right, and be strong enough to say,
Yeah.
look, I need to make I'm the only one who's going to change this, and if the option is to leave, then figure out how to go.
Yeah, right. And you don't even necessarily know which direction you're going to head in, but you've got to start moving, pick a direction almost and move, right? And at least you had some things that were grounding you at that point, right? And it creates this great new opportunity that's actually more in alignment with what you were looking for. So that's another thing, right? That our expectations or paradigms about what we think we want aren't necessarily always what we truly want or need at that moment. And so then to understand that and not be devastated by it, right? Because some people would be devastated. They'd be like, holy crap, however many years to get me here, and now this is not it. But to be able to pivot and say, that's okay, I'm going to move forward, I'm going to find something else, that's great, right? Because a lot of people would be paralyzed by that.
Yeah, and I also think a lot of what plays into that is like there are external influences that we all get,
Yeah.
distracted by. And so like one of the things that had happened to me was I was dating somebody who lived in San Diego. And so instead of my initial plan, which was to move to Africa full time with a
Right.
job, I was going to move to San Diego and work at a job that would have work in Africa, but I would be based in San Diego. And then we broke up before I even got to San Diego. Let's
Wow.
preface that. But you know, all of a sudden, sometimes your plans change for somebody else. And I think, one of the things that's happened to me a few times, right, is okay, I'm not going to actually move to Africa. I'll move somewhere else where I can then work in Africa. Or, when you're in Africa and you think, okay, you've got kind of two options of who's your partner. You can have somebody who's maybe from that country where you're living in, and then you're always going to live in that country, which may not be your path. Maybe your path is to move countries. Or you have somebody who has a job like yours, which is going to move around all the time, but then whose career comes first?
Yeah.
What if they're going to get a job that's going to take them to Sri Lanka and you have this amazing job in Ghana? What do you do then? And so I think this is one of the big challenges of the work in international development, and is figuring out how you balance a life with somebody else or independently, if that's also the route for you, and not sacrificing what you want to achieve in your career with also the places you want to live. And that's a really tough balance that I see a number of people struggle with.
Yeah, that was true in the foreign service, obviously, right? I mean, it was constant, whether and again, like some people ended up marrying locals who then traveled with them, right? Then they had the foreign service lifestyle. Some people were married to other foreign service officers, and then it was a constant struggle of, as you're saying, like whose career is going to take precedence and when, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes being apart.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think
Right?
as a woman, you're often expected to put together what's your want list of your partner. And that want list is often supposed to be that he, if you're in a heterosexual couple, is going to make more money than you or have a better career in some way than you. And then all of a sudden I'm sacrificing my master's degree in order to
Yeah.
pursue your finance career or your whatever career. Like, yeah, figuring out how to maybe actually say, what I'm looking for in a partner is not somebody with a master's degree. Maybe they don't even need a college degree. Maybe I want a partner who puts my career first, and I don't care about this, you know pedigree that society sets up for you, but actually I care about somebody who wants my career to be priority and is willing to follow me around the world. And I think that's also an interesting thing for women to contend with.
Yeah. Wow. Are there other ways that you felt like, I know when I was in the foreign service, there was this class action lawsuit at the time brought by women that the foreign service exam process and assignments and promotions and all that were that women had been discriminated against for decades, and they won, right? And there had to be real changes
Mm.
in the system. To what extent, as you started off your career, did you find any of that misogyny or discrimination that you were facing in your career
I
early on?
wasn't Yeah, I wasn't facing it in the workplace, luckily. I was part of when I moved to Uganda, the organization I joined, actually most people who were my level, I was the Uganda country manager, the Malawi, Tanzania, Zambia, Ghana country managers were all women my age too.
Wow.
So we had kind of an amazing coalition, and we were all very similar personalities. And like you said, having good colleagues, they're some of my closest friends to this day. I message them like, hey, can you read my CV over? Or they'll send me like, oh, have you seen this article? And we're really close in that way. So that was a really great asset. But you're moving to countries that you don't belong. You stick out like a sore thumb. You are a woman in a space that's not your own in a lot of ways. And so sometimes, you're dealing with understanding if it's cultural, if it's gender, if you're not
Mm,
getting something and it's a big deal or it's not a big deal. And so it's just a lot of cultural navigation that's happening when you're in Africa, that there is misogyny. Am I part of it because I'm a woman right now, because I'm a foreigner right now, because I'm a woman director right now? It was just something I had to say, like, I'm just going to not feed into it. I'm not going to process it. I'm just going to keep my job, keep moving forward.
wow. And the job, that first job in Uganda, what was that like? And were you happy in the work? Was it quote unquote everything you dreamed of? What was that like?
Yeah, it was chaos and it was amazing. So I stayed with that company. They're called Viamo. I stayed with them for 5.5 years. And so I opened their Uganda operation, built it up, and then decided to do it again and move to Kenya and open their Kenyan
Wow.
operation. Viamo I'll just tell you what they do. It's kind of cool. They took the idea of a robocall, a pre-recorded voice message that you hate when you call the bank or that calls you. But how do you repurpose that for somebody who's illiterate and doesn't have a
Mm,
smartphone? And so you could call a number 321, short code 321, and it would say in the local language, if you want to learn about health, press one. If you want to learn
wow.
about farming, press two. If you want to hear today's weather, press three. And so you could just call in on an old brick Nokia phone and listen to this
Wow.
information for free at your time of interest. Um, and then we would also run surveys. So, like, nobody ever asks people in some really remote rural areas their opinion, but we're running surveys, yeah, finding out all sorts of information for, UNICEF or some USAID program or somebody like that. And so I thought the work was really interesting. They were the only people really considering low literate populations in that way. It was when I started with them when the SMS boom was really happening and your phone was just inundated with text messages that you were ignoring. And so you think, has any woman who thought, I'm going to deliver a baby at home, gotten a text message and gone, yeah, I'm going to change my mind? Like, she can't even read a full sentence. It was like 80% of Ugandan women cannot read a full sentence. And so, what are you
Wow.
doing with all of this aid money, this money that's coming
Wow.
from UN agencies and the US government and philanthropies, and sending text messages to illiterate women? Like, it's not going to change their mind. So, by using voice and by thinking about strategically about how you speak to people. So, like, Zambian women want to be told good mothers do this, but Kenyan women might want to hear don't be a bad mom, you should do this. Like, the tone
Wow.
in which you speak to people changes. And so I was really passionate about that work. It was chaos. I want to say that too, and I loved it. Like, I was there opening up the Uganda office. My boss flew in from South Africa for 4 days for onboarding, and then he left, never to be seen again. I was fully
Wow.
alone. I was working out of my house. I was paying bills out of my own bank account, being reimbursed at the end of the month. This was like really
Wow.
the beginning of things. But luckily, Olivia, my classmate, was on speed dial. So my boss would say, "Okay, can you respond to an RFP with an SOW to make sure you talk about IVR with M&Os and RP, our our triple P?" And I'm like, Olivia, what did he just say to me? I don't know any of these words. Like, I didn't learn them in grad school and I didn't pay attention. And so she would help me understand everything that was just said. There was no Google Drive, there was no Slack. We had like one Skype chat, and I talked to my boss once a week. That was it. And so I
Wow.
really had to hit the ground running and figure it out myself. And I actually really enjoyed it.
Wow. Talk about you got to grow up quick in that job, right? I mean,
So quick.
wow. Well,
Yeah.
any epic lessons, any epic failures during that time?
Yeah, my favorite failure. I always tell everyone about this. Okay, so I really believe in what we did and what they do still today. They're amazing. But I'd gone to a meeting at UNICEF, and UNICEF had just spent, I think, $1 million on a text-based platform that they were adapting from a South African platform that was very successful, but they were adapting it for Uganda. And I was invited to this UNICEF meeting I was 25 and I was, maybe in the country for like 6 months at that point. So I got invited to this meeting by a third party. And immediately I came in and I was like, why are you spending all your money on a text-based system when 80% of Ugandan women can't read a full sentence? Why are you only using the system in public health facilities when 60% of Ugandan women use private health facilities? Why are you using a platform that's only partnered with this mobile network operator and not that mobile network operator, which has 40% of the population? And I just like eviscerated
Wow.
this program. And the guy who was in charge never called me back again. And we were working with
Wow.
UNICEF in every other country, and they were
Oh my
not
gosh.
responding to me ever again. And then that guy got promoted to like regional head of digital at UNICEF. And I was like, no. And
Oh
then he
my
moved to Kenya,
gosh.
and then I moved to Kenya. And I was like, oh my
Oh,
God, I burnt this bridge that was like such an important ally. And I didn't know because
oh,
I was defending the population that I really believe needed better
man.
services, but I did it in such a hacksaw way. And I'm so embarrassed. And luckily, like I reached out to him about a year ago, just like about a job opportunity at UNICEF I was interested in. And he was very kind and he didn't mention it. And he was like, yeah, I'll let you know if I see anything in the department and like feel free to reach out again if you see another job that you're interested in. But I was just always so embarrassed that I had done that. Yeah. So
Wow.
tread lightly with people was a big lesson from the beginning.
Yeah. You need to be like those women that when you first went down to Tulane, right? Be nice. Like, how y'all
Oh
doing?
my God.
And
Well, that was actually another interesting thing. So I did play that game. So we had to partner with Airtel, which is like the equivalent of AT&T or Verizon, right? The biggest mobile network operator. And they were the ones responsible for getting our calls for free that people could ring in. And I showed up and I needed to get some documents signed. And I showed up to Uganda. Sheila was my contact. And so I would email Sheila. She would never respond. I got Sheila's number and I'd call her and she'd be like, oh yeah, I'm working on it. But then like no progress would ever be made. And so it's super uncomfortable for Americans, but I started showing up at Sheila's office. And
wow.
every time I showed up, Sheila was like, awesome, cool. Yeah. Let me do that right now. You're here. Let me just, yeah, put all this stuff aside and I'll do it right now while you're here. So I would show up to Sheila's office kind of like a couple days a week, trying to be really cool about it, low key, just sit at a desk close to Sheila. She knew I was there. It would remind her, but wouldn't like put pressure on. And I did this for a few weeks, maybe even a couple months, because I had access to her building. And then eventually she said they got new furniture. And Sheila said, that's your desk. I said, what? She said, yeah, that's your desk over there. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, great. So yeah, that soft power really worked well. And then
Wow.
it was so funny because I used that as our office for like the next, actually, till I left, like 3 years.
Wow.
Um, and then it was funny, my manager would say to all the other country offices, like, what did Jamie do to get in to have a desk at the mobile network operator? You guys do what Jamie did. And I'm going, this isn't replicable. Like, this was just a furniture situation that got lucky. I can't promise
Oh,
anybody else will have this, but
that's hysterical. Wow.
yeah. Yeah.
All right, so Uganda, then Kenya, right?
Yeah.
And so at that point, how old are you?
So when I moved to Kenya, I was 29.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
How different were you from the person who left the United States at that point?
Oh my gosh. So different. I think in so many ways, but I think one of the big things that I think is really interesting was just like the network of people and the people I engage with intentionally and favorably and for fun and things were just coming from all different backgrounds, just so unlike the US, right? In the US, we become a we're attracted to people who are from a same socioeconomic background from us, who sound like us, who look like us. And so we build these little pods that are clones of ourselves, right? As close as possible and great for that. But really, when I was in Uganda, I learned so much about not being, having a diverse network and not being an elitist when I look for friends. And so, yeah, I mean, like that had really influenced who I am. My friends some have graduated with doctorate degrees, and some haven't finished high school, and some are, um, one owns a concrete company, and one's a photojournalist, and one is figuring it out, and one is, running, sitting on panels with the head of the WHO talking about
Mm-hmm.
immunization. Like I built this network of friends that were so wide and diverse, and I think that's really influenced me to love so many more people from so many different
Mm-hmm.
walks of life.
That's beautiful. Yeah, because we
Yeah.
do end up, I think, particularly in the US, we end up mostly having contact with other people who are very similar to us, right? And it really narrows our universe.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So after Kenya, what happened then?
Yeah, so in Kenya, I built Viamo for another 2.5 years through COVID, which was chaos because you had all these
Wow.
people who said, no, no, we're not interested in digital solutions. We like to sit with our community members one on one. They're saying that in February, and in March, they're calling you. We can't meet with our community members. Do you have a solution for us? And you're going,
Oh
yeah,
my
I
gosh.
do.
Yeah.
So it was insane. It was chaos,
Wow.
but it was yeah, it was good to be part of a movement. And then I decided I didn't really think about leaving until I learned about another digital tech company that was starting up in Kenya, and I learned about what they were doing and just thought it was really cool. So I joined this Kenyan startup for 2 years until kind of ran out of money and I needed a salary. And I did that for a few years, but and then consulted. But basically, yeah, now I found myself in this independent consulting world where I'm
Mm.
trying to take all these experiences that I've built and see how I can help other organizations, whether it's startups that are trying to get into the development world, that are doing social impact good things, or it's nonprofits that are trying to learn how to generate revenue and be social entrepreneurs, or yeah, the future, I think I see myself working with foundations or US government or venture capital firms to say, how do we spend our money effectively so that the programs that I've seen and worked with over the years that I believe in and I've seen make an impact, um, can do more of that. And then the stuff that I've seen that I'm like, oh God, like, let's not do another male circumcision campaign, please. Nobody wants male circumcision. How do
Oh.
I convince them that that's not a good priority for money? Or like another poster that just says, like, get immunized. I'm like, no one's inspired. So how do I, work with people who have money to make sure it's spent well?
What made you pivot to the world of consulting, which again is it's very different than having a salary and working for a company or an organization. Like, what made you do that? It's kind of a leap of faith in a way, right?
Oh, I think it was just a accident. I applied to a lot of jobs that I didn't get, and then the thing I did get was a consultancy. And then yeah, it's just
Wow.
snowballed a bit. I think consulting has been great. It's kind of awesome in some ways because I don't go to any all staff meetings. I don't talk about HR
Mm,
policies. I just kind of show up, I do my work, I go home, or not show up, I mean on Zoom I show up,
right.
but I just do my work and I do these focused activities, and that's really cool in some ways, but I also think it's not going to be a forever option for me. I'd like
Right.
to be part of an organization again and be a bit have a bigger role to play.
Mm. Why South Africa? How'd you end up there?
Yeah. Oh, I love Cape Town. It's just the best place in the world. So after, yeah, I think almost 8 years or 8 years in East Africa, which I loved East Africa, but it's chaos for sure. It's a
Mm,
lot of things going on at the same time. It was just time for something a little bit easier. And um I have a partner, and so he was also over East Africa. And so a big consideration was, where can we move that has a low cost of living? He's Scottish, I'm American, so we have different passports. So also, thank you, Brexit, not capable of moving to the EU,
wow.
um,
Yeah.
not capable of necessarily securing these digital nomad visas because he is a student, sort of, and he's a day trader. So he doesn't have like a standard revenue model. So yeah, we kind of didn't fit in any easy boxes. We couldn't go to either of our countries. And so South Africa
Wow.
offered us that flexibility.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so
it's
these are the fun things you get to think about all the time. My
right.
mind never turns off.
Yeah, right. I mean, it feels like every aspect of your life has to be purposeful or mindful, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Everything has to be mindful.
Yeah. Do you have a mindfulness practice? Do you meditate or anything like that? Yoga?
I do meditate a bit. I actually I'm part of like a kind of women's fitness community. And more than mindfulness in terms of meditation, we do something that's called a 24-hour exercise. So every day you plan what's your next day going to be to achieve your fitness goals. And so
Wow.
part of my fitness goals are I work out 3 times a week. I do 15,000 steps a day. And I have a specific, I get a specific number of calories in. And so every day, instead of planning the whole week and saying, okay, I'm going to do this thing perfectly the whole week, you think, okay, what's tomorrow going to be that I can achieve my goals? And what am I going
Mm.
to do tomorrow? And so that 24-hour practice I find really helps make sure that you always are on target the next day.
Wow. And staying in the now. It's like this 24-hour period, right? Because we often,
Yeah.
it's beyond that. Who knows? Like people are going to come into your life tomorrow that could change your life, right? You never know.
Yeah. But you always want to be
Mm.
open to that too, right? Is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that is a huge balance is saying, okay, I'm going to go to bed at 9:30 tomorrow night. And that's my plan. And then what happens at 8:45 when you run into your friend and you're like, do I stay out and hang out and have some laughs or do I say no and stick to my rules? And like, yeah, where are you in your ability to be flexible in these things?
Yeah.
It's hard to know sometimes.
It is, right? But I think like you seem to be someone who very early on had a sense of self, right? And values and priorities. And I guess that maybe that's the way to do it, right? That if that grounds you, then you have to trust that you're going to make more often than not the right call in the moment with that. But at least you're being thoughtful about it. You're aware that you're making a choice. A lot of times people aren't even aware that they're making a choice, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, being decisive is one of my superpowers, and also being able to change my mind with influence is my other superpower. So I'll be like, great, we're leaving at 9. That's the right plan. And if someone was like, no, no, we should leave at 10:30, I'm like, great, that works too. And so I think whatever, that's a small example, but being able to actually come up with something quickly, I think alleviates a lot of stress rather than waffling back and forth.
Yeah. What have you learned about international development that maybe shifted some paradigms, or what are your paradigms now about it? Like, how, to what when does it work? When doesn't it work? Even for the listeners, like someone might be like, "What the hell is it?" and "How does it work?"
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So, look, I learned a heck of a lot. And actually, one of the things I do in consulting is I work with small startups to just teach them, like, how does the system work? And so,
Mhm.
one of the things I didn't understand going into this is, a lot of the funding goes into these US nonprofits or consulting firms and never even necessarily reaches the countries it's intended for, because so much of that overhead is paying for an office in Washington, D.C., and a HR team in D.C., and American people's, Social Security. And so a lot of the money in development actually isn't getting to the countries it's intended
Mm.
for. And then I think one of the things that's really been interesting is learning about how effective that development money is as compared to investment in private sector companies. And so one of the things I find quite sad and challenging is just there's been so much money spent in development, and so much of it hasn't made an impact, not necessarily because someone did something bad, but the first economic study that ever took place was the impact of textbooks in Kenyan schools. And after 4 years of a rigorous randomized control trial, they found that textbooks made no impact in Kenyan public schools. And so you're just like, it's not that they did it bad. It's just you're realizing sometimes the thing we think is a solution isn't a solution to the problem. And so it can be a little bit disheartening for sure. Um, but then thinking about, what does a $200 million USAID agriculture project do? Well, if 50% of that money never reaches the country it's intended to reach, or 70% never reaches it. Okay, so you're dealing with a very small pool of money that's meant to impact a very large number of people. Whereas if you look at a venture capitalist firm that puts $50 million into this agriculture startup, that $50 million is going straight into the startup, and all of it is expected to build a product that's going to return that investment. And that product might be an insurance product. It could be there's like a tractor rental company. There's a cool one in Kenya, or whatever it is. But so you realize, like, actually, I wanted to be in development. I never wanted to be in finance. But Steve, guess who's really curious about becoming an investor herself now is me, because I see the effectiveness of the way that money can be spent as compared to the way development money is spent. And so that's been a really interesting thing to understand and weed through over the last few years. And seeing more impact-focused investors come into the African market has really been a big change since 2020 specifically. Like, COVID really saw a huge surge up through 2022. It's cut back the last couple of years, but it'll continue forward.
Wow. Again, because some of the people listening may have like no background on this. When we're talking development money, some of that's coming from private foundations, right? And some of it's coming from the United States government through USAID, the Agency for International Development, right? Some of it's coming from the EU, right? And maybe specific countries or the EU as a whole. Like, are there other places that money's coming from?
Oh, there's a bunch of places. So you have kind of what's called a bilateral donor. So that's the government, US. UK's pretty much cut their entire program that funds this. So now they're only funding projects that actually could have an economic impact. So they fund solar, clean energy kind of work. They'll fund some ag and infrastructure, but they've cut all of their health. They've cut their education. Actually, one of the oldest aid companies in the UK just shut last week. It was founded in the 1800s. Because there's no more UK funding for these types of programs anymore. So you have kind of the US government and some European countries, and then you have some foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You've got groups like Gavi, which is the Global Vaccine Alliance, and the WHO, who focus on health. You've got Mackenzie Scott, who's been playing and shaking things up a really, really interesting way. So what she's done that's very different from anybody else is
Jeff
she's
Bezos'
been giving large
ex-wife, right?
his ex-wife, yeah. So she's been giving large chunks of money in the millions to organizations with no necessity to tell her how they're spending the money and give any impact measures. So it's this transformative funding that allows smaller organizations to grow, allows larger organizations to pivot, to expand. And so you can spend that money however the heck you want, which has been really amazing for a lot of organizations. And then the other major avenue is also UN agencies. So UN agencies don't necessarily have everybody out doing the work themselves. They'll fund nonprofits or community-based organizations to go out and help promote their activities as well.
Wow. And for the United States part, a lot of people say like, oh my gosh, why are we spending all this money on other countries? We should be helping people here at home. And it's a separate conversation probably about like, it's not actually a choice between those two things. But it's a really small part of the federal budget, right? I mean, it's less than 1%. And the bulk of it is actually like Israel, Egypt, right? A lot of it's like direct military assistance. So how much money are we talking about? I mean, do you have an idea of like how much money USAID spends in Africa? Or
I don't off the top of my head, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, it's significant for Africa because it funds entire components of governments. Now, it doesn't go to the government. So, for example, if you were to cut the health budget, USAID's health budget in ex-African country, they probably would have to reduce their budgets by 70%, if not more. So the foundation of these governments' ability to function is significantly dependent upon aid. However, all that being said is, as I said, a lot of that aid actually doesn't get directly to that country itself. Right. It's channeled through nonprofits the initial intention was to build accountability, but now it's also built waste almost.
Yeah. Bureaucracy.
So yeah, I mean, look, it's in the billions for sure. It's not small change, but it's also not, if you look at like the proportionality of how much money is spent on the continent in health as compared to the population size, it's something like, you know, they have 20% of the global people and 2% of the global budget in health, right? And so it
Wow.
doesn't match
Yeah.
how those two things are spent.
Yeah. Do you have a sense if you think like 5 years down the road, where do you see yourself? Or is it too hard? Like, is it?
I, yeah, I used to say like, I don't want to think 5 years in advance because anything's possible. You know, I really like to think of myself of in shorter spurts of, 1 to 2 years is great because I'm open, right? I'm an open book.
Mm,
I'm willing to take new opportunities and play them out. And should they work, then great. But if they don't, that's fine to move to the next. I worked in drones that were looking at flower farming for 4 months last year. Who would have thunk I would be in a rose farm with in Kenya? That was fun for 4 months, and then I took 2 months off and was home in the U.S. Never thought I'd see 2 months of unemployment, and now I'm working in this nonprofit. So I like to think shorter term. I think there's immense
mm.
value in it. Um, so in 5 years, who knows? In a year or 2 years, I'd like to be actually in full-time employment, working um, to hopefully advise and spend money in a well thought out way.
Uh, if you could talk to your 12-year-old self, what would you tell him?
Oh gosh, I would say one, it's all gonna work out, right? Keep pursuing
Mm,
this. You'll get there and it'll make you happy. And two, calm down. It's okay. Just be cool, be cool, be cool, be cool. Yeah, I don't have to be so much type A. It does not have to go your way. Yeah,
wow. Yeah, I think a lot of us could probably use that
right.
advice at some point, right?
Ugh, I wish
Is,
everybody could read their 16-year-old diary. It really puts life in
oh, right.
perspective.
Oh my gosh. Horrifying. That would be horrifying, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Wow. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have?
Oh gosh. No, I think, look, you've gotten my life story. One, for your listeners, coaching is amazing. I've been through quite a bit of coaching in various forms. And I want to put that out there too, because I know you do coaching. I did
Yeah.
coaching before I moved to Kenya. When I was at Diamo, I went in with the intention of saying, what should I do next in my career? Because I was again at a point where everything was there and I had the thing I wanted. So what next? How do you keep
Yeah.
growing when you're satisfied? So she helped me figure out what my next career move was going to be. And then I went back to her when I was deciding to leave Viamo, and I was pursuing two avenues, either joining a startup or joining a consultancy. And so even just one session, she was able to help me revisit and go the right direction. I've hired another career coach later to help me actually practice interviewing. I have a fitness coach that helps me and stay fit, but not like in the gym. He's really helping on mindset of fitness and health. So I love coaching in any form that people can engage with it. Really.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for making that pitch. And I agree with you. When I think back on my life, it was whether it was a coach or a mentor, like those people who helped me at various points process things, imagine things, point me in the right direction, whatever. I mean, it was indispensable. And it's watching the Olympics this week. You're like, boy, everybody's got a coach. Yeah, isn't it great? Right?
In do you watch Full Swing, the Netflix documentary about
Yeah,
golf? That was
yeah,
another episode
yeah,
of like, get a
yeah,
coach,
yeah.
get a coach.
Right? So true. Well, Jamie, this is awesome. It's so delightful. I got to tell you, part of me, obviously, I started off in a somewhat similar path, and then for a variety of reasons, took a bunch of left turns that all worked out great for me. But there's part of me that's a little bit jealous. Like you're living a life that I think is so dynamic and meaningful and interesting and challenging in really interesting ways. Like I'm proud of you and a little bit jealous maybe and really delighted that we got to catch up and that you were able to share all this wisdom and a great life story with the listeners here. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. And if any of the listeners or any of your clients want to chat, I'm happy to discuss anything that they might be experiencing
Oh,
or
great.
thinking. as I said, I make decisions or I have opinions quickly. I'll change my mind, but I'm always there, something to come to the table with.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll make
Yeah.
sure that put people in touch with you if they reach out to us. And thank you so much. And good luck figuring out the next chapter. Yeah, this is great.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Jamie.
Thanks so much. Cool.
So thank you to Jamie Arkin for joining me for this fascinating conversation. I loved that conversation. I think she's just so intelligent and reflective and authentic. I think there were so many great life lessons throughout the whole conversation. I think her approach towards life, having this, she kept calling it a plan, and she kind of did, right? But what really was going on was she had these kind of big picture goals, intentions, a sense of purpose, and she was flexible along the way, right? And adaptable as circumstances changed, as she got more experience and new opportunities came up. She learned more about herself. And I think that was huge. I think being someone who can be adaptable and flexible is so important. It's going to be even more important in the years to come. So I thought that was great, but I thought there were so many great life lessons throughout. And I was really glad also, obviously, that at the end she talked about the importance of coaching. And obviously, I couldn't agree more. And if you'd like to have a conversation with me about how coaching could change your life, I would love to have that conversation. The first consultation is always free. So go to my website, www.integrityanjoy.com, and let's have a conversation, right? It can't hurt, and I think it could really help. So please do that. Also, please make sure you're following the podcast. Please rate and review this podcast. That's the way we get in front of more people, is the more people who like it and give a good review and a good rating. It'll get to more people, and I think there are a lot of people who need to hear the stories like Jamie's. So please help out with that. And then follow me on social media, at Integrity and Joy, on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and on LinkedIn. And thank you. Thank you for stopping by, for listening to this episode. And I look forward to continuing the conversation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. All right, great. So thank you. That was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Oh, good.
Wow.
Good.
You're so interesting and engaging and thoughtful and reflective. It's really a gift, you know?
Thank you. I don't know how that happened, but somewhere along the way it did. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, as you pointed out,
Thank
you
you.
were impressive in high school, so it's been there.
It's always been on a path. I literally remember sitting down with you one day at life school and just being like, okay, so how do I get myself to the Foreign Service? Like what's the path? What do I need to do? So yeah, it's really fun to just be that place that we talked about.
Thanks for listening. If today's episode resonated with you, imagine what we could accomplish together in a one-to-one coaching session. Visit integrityanjoy.com to learn more and book your free consultation. Let's create the life you've been striving for.